Right. So welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for returning. It's great to see you again. This is the fourth workshop of this creative writing course. Just to quickly summarize, there are still people tuning in now, I can see, and I'll come back to you and welcome you shortly. Sorry, I always say that, and last week I forgot by the time we got to the end. But thank you for tuning in. People are still tumbling through now, which is great. But this is workshop number 4 of a 10-week course. In week 1, we talked about kind of finding your inspiration, about ingraining writing into to make it a big part of your life. And then in week 2, we started the course properly, where we talked about characterization, the process of creating characters. And then last week, we talked about settings, how we can create an environment in which our story is told and bring that environment to life for our readers. And if you've missed any of those workshops, you can watch them back on my Facebook page or YouTube channel at any time. Do not click on any links from spammers. All of the workshops are only on my YouTube page or Facebook page. So do not click on any external links. So today we're going to talk about, yes, I just saw someone commented there saying, yeah, the number of viewers each week is going down. Yes, it is. It's often the case, actually, because this is something which isn't necessarily for everybody, and some people may not have the patience or the time or inclination to continue. So I don't take it personally, but I'm just grateful for the people who do return. But yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I didn't see who wrote it actually, but I do notice, of course. But today we're going to talk about narrative, and technically, I guess we're going to talk more about plot than narrative, and there is a difference. The plot is kind of the structure of the story, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And the narrative is more around the voice, and so really next week is when we talk about narrative. So, technical writing academics would probably look at this course and listen to me now and vilify me and think I'm an amateur, but I'm definitely not someone who gets caught up in the technical parts of writing. I believe creative writing is for everyone, and it is a form of creativity, and we should just enjoy it. So today we're going to talk about how we can structure our stories, and we're going to bring together elements of characterization and settings into that. I mentioned last week that you may remember that we don't necessarily think about all of these different parts of the writing family in isolation. So we don't necessarily just think about characters on their own and settings. We think about them together. And today I hope to kind of bring that to a new level. So think of writing a story. It's kind of like baking a cake. All of the ingredients on their own are probably not as tasty, but when we combine them and we allow the ingredients to interact and get to know each other, that's when we can create something unique. And hopefully today that will kind of make a bit more sense. So in terms of structure for our stories, we all know the beginning, the middle, and end. That's the kind of the very basic premise of a story. We have a beginning, and then we have a middle, and then we have an end. But we're going to dive a bit deeper into that today, in what I call the 7 steps to story structure. And like I always say, creative writing is all about expressing yourself, and we don't want to be too formulaic in our writing. By that, I mean we don't always want to follow the same structure in every story that we write, because it would get boring for you, the author, And it would also become quite predictable for our readers. But there are some key ingredients or milestones that we can include or think about in our stories that we can use as a bit of a framework when we're writing. So think of it as a guide. So the 7 steps to story structure, that's what we're going to be doing today. And I'm going to read out those 7 steps now, and then I will talk about each of them in more detail. And with each of the steps, there will be one part of an activity. So today there's going to be a 7-part activity, which will require quick fire ideas from you. And, you know, I've seen a lot of the comments on these various videos where, you know, some people are struggling to come up with an idea. And so we can always come up with ideas just by kind of interacting with our brain, getting the creative juices flowing, and the activity today will help you do that. So the 7 steps to story structure are: number 1, introduction; number 2, incident; number 3, action; number 4, adventure; number 5, setback; number 6, salvage; and number 7, finale. So they're the 7 steps that we're now going to talk through in more detail. And for each of those 7 steps, there will be a part of an activity that we will build on throughout. And I want you to, with the activity, I would like you to go with your gut instinct. I would like you to just kind of write down the first things, the first ideas that come into your head, and see where we end up by the end of it. So let's start with step 1, which is introduction. So this is the beginning of your story. And this is where we introduce the lead character. You know, at the beginning, we want to introduce our character and tell the reader, you know, what is life like for our character. We want to instill a sense of normality at this point in the story, so the reader understands what life is like for our character on a normal day before things start to happen, because inevitably in your story something will happen, an event or a situation, which may well change our character's situation or life. So at the beginning of the story, and we don't want to spend, depending on which audience you're writing for, but we generally don't want to spend too long on introducing the character and the world in which they live, so the setting, because, you know, that might get a bit dull and self-indulgent for the reader to digest. But essentially we kind of map out, we introduce the character to the reader, where they live, what type of life they live, what do they do, who are their key relationships, and we kind of set the scene. So what I would like you to do now, this is part 1 of 7 parts of an activity. So this is part 1. Off the top of your heads, write it down on paper, and if you want to, write it down in the comment section and I'll pick out some examples. I would like you to create a character, a brand new character. So it could be a person, an animal, an object, an alien. I would also like you to create a location where the character lives. And I would like you to create, decide when the story will take place. So it could be the past, the present, or the future, and, you know, set a decade, decide on a decade or a particular year. So for example, I'm going to bring Boris back from past weeks, and Boris is going to live in a quiet village in the 1950s. So that's what you need to do for the first part of this activity. Remember, just go with your gut instinct. You know, whatever comes into your head first, just write it down, and let's see where you end up by the end of it. And, you know, there's no such thing as a bad idea. Just write it down, and you can always come back to your ideas at a later on. So that's step 1 of story structure. We introduce the character, a little bit about them, their kind of key relationships, who's important to them or who's an enemy. Do they have family, children? Are they a loner? Where do they live? What do they do? What is normal life like for our lead character or characters? Then we come to step 2, which is incident. So this is where the story starts to really kind of kick on. An incident could be a situation or an event which starts a chain of events which then drives the story forwards. So it kind of, something happens which changes our character's life or situation. So it could be something good, or something bad, or something strange, or something mysterious. For people who are just tuning in, today we're covering 7 steps to story structure. And I'm going to recap as we go through this, so hopefully you don't miss out too much. We're now on step 2, which is incident, and I'll recap in a second. So, the incident could be something bad. Let me give you an example. Boris lives in a village, a quiet village in the 1950s, and the incident could be that his parents decide that they're going to move to a different country. So they're going to move to New York. That's it. You can see I'm just making this up off the top of my head. But that is the incident. Something or an event or situation happens which then changes the outlook for our lead character. Another example could be, it could be something that starts off positive and then kind of unravels into quite a negative and troublesome situation. So Boris could win the lottery. And at first, the reader will be thinking, fantastic, Boris has won the lottery, the future's bright. But then, all of a sudden, things start to unravel. All of these, people from Boris's past come out of the woodwork. Someone tries to burgle his house. Someone tries to commit fraud. Yes, I'm aware that in the 1950s, they didn't have the lottery, I don't think. But you get the point. So far, this is 7 steps to story structure. Step 1 is introduction, where we introduce the lead character, the world in which they exist, what is life like for that character. And then step 2 is where we have some kind of incident, an event or a situation. It could be good, it could be bad, it could be strange. It could be mysterious. Something happens which changes the outlook for our character. So part 2 of your activity, in part 1 I asked you to come up with a character and decide where that character will live and when, the period of time when the character exists. Now I would like you to come up with an incident. So something that happens to your character that changes their kind of future or their immediate future or outlook. So again, like I always say, you trust your instincts. Just come up with ideas, let them flow down, just write them down, and see what happens. See where those ideas can take you. So step 1 is introduction and step 2 is incident. So we're now at a point in our story where our reader kind of knows a little bit about our character or characters, and they understand where they live and kind of what's important to them or what they do or what type of character they are. And they've now kind of experienced some kind of incident which has changed our character's outlook. Now we come to step 3, and we call that action. This is where our lead character, or characters, depending on how you want to do things, they decide to kind of act. They want to kind of right the wrong or seek justice or solve the mystery. They decide to act because of what has happened to them. So they react to the situation, to the incident. So Boris, you could say that Boris has lives in a village in the 1950s, and then the incident is that his parents decide he's going to move to New York. So Boris, what the action Boris could take, because he might not want to move to New York, which I'm not sure why he wouldn't, but he could decide to run away. So that would be my action. So it's often when our character decides to act and decides to do something about this incident, they become absorbed in that quest. It becomes their mission, their purpose, and they'll do anything to kind of right the wrong or to seek justice or solve the mystery. And this is quite a critical milestone in the story, because this is kind of where, you know, the story really starts to kind of move forwards. And so what we've done so far in step 1, in introduction, we've introduced a character and the world in which they exist. And then in step 2, we've had an incident, an event or a situation which has changed the existence or outlook for our character. And now our character has decided to do something about it. So at the beginning, I mentioned the classic beginning, middle and end of structuring a story. You could say that these first 3 steps are kind of like the beginning. This is the beginning of a story, where the reader now has kind of knows the character, has that sense of contrast of what life was like for our character before something happened to them, and now their life has changed. So the reader has kind of went on that journey with the character and has that kind of sense of difference and contrast. So now for part 3 of the activity, I would like you to build on, you've created a character, you've decided where your character lives and what kind of period when your character exists, and then you've chosen an incident, something which happens to your character. Now for part 3, I would like you to decide what is your character going to do about it. What is the action that your character is going to take in reaction to the incident? So let me just use my example. Boris lives in a quiet village in the 1950s, which is the introduction. The incident is that his parents have said, we're going to move to New York. Boris doesn't want to move to New York, so his action is that Boris is going to run away. So I'm making this up with you now. So let's just use your instincts, write down the things that come into your head, and let's see at the end of these 7 steps what your kind of idea looks like. And it might mean you might read it back and you think that is just a load of nonsense. I could never make anything of that. Or you might think, actually, there's some pretty good ideas in there which I could use and recycle for another story that I'm writing, or I could just keep them in my ideas library that for future use. So let's move on to step 4. So sorry if I'm recapping a lot, but we are moving through the steps fairly quickly, and I'm conscious that people are still just tuning in now. So 7 steps to story structure, and we're now moving into step 4. So far we've had step 1, which is the introduction. We've introduced the character, where they live, and what type of life they have. What is normal life like for our character? Then we've had step 2, where we've had an incident. Something has happened, which means our character's life or situation is now different. And then in step 3, our character has decided to act, to do something in response to the incident. Now let's move on to step 4, which is adventure. Now this is kind of where we get to the middle of the story. So again, beginning, middle and end of a story. Step 1, step 2 and step 3 are kind of the beginning. Now we come to the middle, which is a big part, adventure. And this is where our character or characters can go on all of these different crazy adventures. They may get involved in some very challenging and difficult situations. They may uncover secrets or get into scary, life-threatening environments. This is a big part of the story. And so you might want to kind of make this as, if you were writing a 1,000 word story, then, this part would be a good 300, 400 words. So we want to start now, thinking back to characterization and the topics we covered in that workshop. You may remember that I talked about how our characters evolve in the story, how they change, they may develop, they may grow in confidence, they may become stronger, they may learn about something new, they may develop a relationship with another character. But essentially, this is a good part where your characters are going to be involved in all sorts of different experiences that they may possibly not be used to. So, we want to document that evolution of our characters, that change, that development. And we can do that, if you remember in the characterization workshop, we can do that through their different mannerisms, the way they talk, the words they say, their posture, their facial expressions, the actions they take. So adventure is step 4. And this is where now we've, let's go back. We've introduced our character and the world in which they exist in step 1. Then we've had an incident which has changed the outlook for our characters. And then in step 3, our character has decided to act and do something. And now in step 4, there's adventure as a result of the action or actions that our character or characters are taking. So, part 4 of the activity. Let me just have, I'm going to read out some, let me have a look at some of the activity examples in the comments. So from Joe, Snowy the penguin explores her iceberg and gets lost. She has to find a rubber ring, and on the way she makes a friend. Lovely, lovely. So remember, whatever audience you're writing for, whether you're writing historical fiction for adults or whether you're writing picture books or books for teenagers, the ideas can be adapted to suit a particular audience. Let me pick out another one. Thank you for that, Joe. Brilliant. Let me have a look. From Julie, Holly and Tom get sucked into a mirror and they are suddenly transferred. Brilliant. Love it. Bit of fantasy in there, bit of magic. Love it. Another one from Jennifer there. Let's have a look. Jem lives in a city and she moves to an elegant autumn forest. Brilliant imagery there. The elegant autumn forest, love it. So you see, hopefully by the end of this 7-part activity, you may have the bones, the skeleton of an idea for a story or something that you can use in another story that you're writing. So just, always trust your instincts and be confident in the ideas that you come up with. Because if you're not confident in the ideas that you come up with, then you're never going to develop them. So that was step 4, adventure. So now we're going to move on to step 5. So just to recap again, I am going to keep recapping because I know some new people are still tuning in. Step 1 is introduction. We introduce the character, the world in which they exist, what is normal life like for them. Step 2 is incident. Something happens, an event or situation which changes the outlook for our character. Step 3 is action, where our character or characters decide to act, to do something in response to the incident, to the event or situation that has happened to them. And then in step 4, we call this adventure. And this is where our character or characters go on a journey. They go on an adventure because they're on this quest or this mission to solve the mystery or seek justice or right the wrong or do whatever it is that they've set out to do, because they've become absorbed in this mission. And it's kind of this is a big part of the story. So now we move on to step 5, which is called setback. So this is, often in stories, something will happen which kind of derails the progress of our character in their mission. So it feels like, something happens. So it could be, they uncover some news which all of a sudden changes the whole complexion of what they originally thought was true. Or a friend who originally, the reader thinks was a good person turns out to have been lying, and they've been feeding information to the enemy. It could be anything, but something happens, a setback, which makes it seem like, hope is slipping away when everything is lost. And our lead character, it feels like their mission is seemingly impossible. So this is a point in the story when you could perhaps introduce an early twist. So maybe, like I said, a character turns out to be something which they're not. So this is a good point in the story where now, our reader has already been on a bit of a journey with our character. They've got to know the character. They've got to know the world in which they exist. Something has happened to them. The characters decided to act. And now they've been on this adventure and they seem like they're making lots of progress in their mission. But now something has happened. There's been a setback. And, this is a real blow. It's a real kick in the teeth. And that's what we want our reader to feel. We want our reader to think, oh no, no, why has this happened? And so this is that point in the story, step 5, setback. So now for part 5 of your activity, and if you would like to, so I can read some more examples out, because I really enjoy reading them out. If you would like, when you write down your setback part 5 of the activity, if you would like to copy and paste steps 1 to 4 into the same comment and then add step 5, then I can read the whole thing out. If you would like to do that, no problem. If not, but if you would, please feel free. So for part 5 of your activity, so let's just recap. I asked you in part 1 to come up with a character and a location in which they exist, and also to decide on whether they exist in the past, the present, or the future, and decide on a decade or a particular year they exist. Then I asked you to come up with an incident. Something happens, an event or a situation that happens to your lead character, which changes their outlook or their situation. And then I asked you to come up with an action. What is your character going to do about it? What are they going to do in response to that incident? And then in adventure, actually I missed part 4 of the activity for adventure, I think. My apologies. Let's merge them two together. So in part 4 of the activity, so now that you've come up with a character and where they live and the period of history or in the future when they exist, an incident has happened to them, you've created an action in which they're going to respond to that incident. For part 4 of the activity, for adventure, I would like you to write down up to 3, it could be 1 or it could be 2 or it could be 3, challenges that your character could face. So let me use my example, because like you, I am kind of making I'm doing the activity just the same as you. So I came up with Boris. I reintroduced Boris from last week. Boris, he lives in a quiet village in the 1950s, and that was part 1 of the activity. Part 2, for the incident for Boris was that his parents decided that they were going to move to New York, and Boris didn't want to move to New York. The action that Boris was going to take was that he was going to run away. He was going to run away because he didn't want to move to New York. So for adventure, I'm going to give you 3 challenges that Boris could face as a result of running away. So one is he has nowhere to live now. Number 2 is he has no money and no food. And then number 3, he gets involved with a devious character who leads him astray. So there's 3 situations which Boris is now experiencing in this step 4 adventure part of the story. So now in setback, for part 5, I would like you to come up with something that happens which kind of derails your character's adventure. And for me, I will have a think about Boris's setback. He's already had a number of setbacks already. I'll have a think of a setback and I'll add it in a second. So let me just read out some examples of your activities as well. So let's have a look. So this is from Kim, but I don't think it's Kim. I can't remember whose name it is. I think it's your mum's account. But Bolt the bunny, who's stuck in a video game, and if he dies, he really dies. He pretends the game is broke, but when the manager comes, he shuts it down, and that puts him in more danger. Crazy adventures, love it, brilliant. This is how we just come up with ideas. We generate ideas. We unlock the parts of our mind and let the creative juices flowing. So this is from Gareth. 1 had to find true allies. 2 has to destroy elite oil soldiers. Must liberate bats. Very interesting. Love it, Gareth. Tracy. Bob is a snow beast in the North Pole, and Bob's home breaks of the North Pole and is now an iceberg. Very good. Nice climate change theme there, perhaps. Then Bob has to jump onto a new iceberg because he is so small. Because it is so small. He uses the wind to get home quicker, but then he is blown out to sea. Love that, Tracy. Fantastic. Immediately you can visualize the iceberg, the North Pole, the snow, the weather, and you can experience that isolation that Bob must feel. That's brilliant. So I'm going to read out some more examples shortly. So let's move on, but let's just recap quickly, because I know quite a few people have joined partway through. So today we're talking about 7 steps of story structure, 7 milestones that we can apply to our stories and use as a framework. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of our stories have to have all of these different milestones in them, but you can just apply it to your writing just to ensure that your stories are flowing nicely and that they move, the narrative moves quickly to the right level depending on the audience that you're writing for. So step 1 was introduction, where we introduce the character, the world in which they exist, what is normal life like for them. Step 2 was incident. Something happens, a situation or an event. It could be good, it could be bad, it could be strange, it could be mysterious. Something which changes the complexion, the outlook for our character or characters. And then step 3, we have action, where our character responds and does something or decides to do something in response to the incident. And then in step 4, we have adventure, where because our character has decided to act, they're maybe going on a mission or they're going to try and solve a mystery. They go on they get involved in all of these unusual or dangerous or adventurous experiences. And this is a part where our characters can really grow and develop and evolve. And then in step 5, we have setback, where something happens which derails our character's progress, where it feels like everything is lost, where it really feels like a kick in the teeth. And so you can imagine now our reader is invested in the character, has been on this journey, has been with them right from the beginning when life was all sunny and normal and happy or whatever it was like. and now they've got to this point where they've had their hopes raised and then taken away, and maybe again. They've been on a bit of a roller coaster. So step 6, this is now where we start to come towards the end of the story. So remember that when I said at the beginning, the classic structure of any story, beginning, middle, and end. For, in the context of the 7 steps of story structure, you could say steps 1, 2, and 3 are the beginning, or maybe 1 and 2 are the beginning, and 3 and 4 and 5 are the middle. Now we come towards the end, and step 6 is what we call salvage. So this is where our character has now just, had a bit of a blow, or had a setback. Something has happened which it kind of just made things look seemingly impossible. But now they kind of salvage the situation, whether they find some inner strength, or whether a renewed determination, or they come up, something happens in their mind where they come up with an idea to explore a different angle, or they realize something which it had never really occurred to them before. But basically they salvage the situation and they get back onto kind of a positive kind of journey towards the end of the story. So again, this could be a bit of a twist in the tale again, where something happens which is unexpected for the reader. And to have some little twists and turns at various different points of the story, things which obviously make sense to the story we're writing, but actually can surprise the reader or keep the reader guessing. These are all good things that we can think about. So step 6 is salvage. So for part 6 of your activity, so far you have created a character, decided where your character lives, and also when your character exists. Then you created an incident which changed the outlook for your character. Then you decided on an action. What is your character going to do in response to that incident? And then hopefully you came up with up to three things which your character could experience on their adventure, on their mission, on their quest. And then for setback, hopefully some of you have thought about that. Something has happened. So again, it could be another incident, something has happened which kind of derails their progress. Now for part 6, what could your character do or learn or understand or change which kind of salvages the situation? What could get things back on track? So have a think about that. And what I'll do once we finish step 7 and we kind of come to wrapping up, I don't think we're going to have time for Q&As today, unfortunately, but we can do them next week because we're nearly out of time. But I'll read out some more examples because it's really good fun reading the examples. So now we come to step 7, which we call finale. This is the end of the story. So this is where we kind of try, the ending of a story is often the hardest part to write. And you may read lots of authors say that. And often, I've read so many books and so many stories where I've been disappointed in how they end. Either because they've ended, in such an obvious way, or, it just didn't kind of click together at the end. And it is not easy to kind of wrap things up, while at the same time kind of, giving the reader a bit of a surprise or a little twist, but also satisfying the reader that the story comes to a conclusion in which, feels real and feels right. So the finale is where we kind of bring all of these pieces of the jigsaw together. And it's not easy. Some authors, I've read interviews with various authors. Some authors will come up with the ending actually as the first thing they may come up with a concept for a story, and then they may start with the ending and work backwards. There's no magic potion. There's no formula. There's no right or wrong way. But I think what's important when we end stories is that it does the story justice. And by that I mean, if you've got this character who your reader has been on this incredible journey with, because this character has been on this mission, this quest, this adventure, this journey, and they've developed, they've evolved, they've grown in stature. You kind of want the end part, the finale, to do it justice, and so whether it's a happy ending or an unexpected twist at the end, or whether you're writing a sequel where you may want to leave some elements of the story open. So these are all questions and points to consider when you're writing stories. You may well leave a tiny part of a story unanswered. We don't need to answer all of the questions for our reader. You may leave one or two things open, which can leave the door open to write a follow-up or write number 2 or number 3. But the end part of a story is incredibly important. So for part 7 of your activity, if you could try, and this is difficult, because I've asked you to do this 7-part activity, which isn't easy to do. I'm asking you to come up with ideas off the top of your heads, write them down, and it may all look a bit gobbledygook to you. You might think that doesn't sound good or that doesn't make sense. But the most important thing is that you have wrote something down which didn't exist before. 45 minutes ago, those ideas did not exist. You hadn't thought of them. Now you have, and now you've written them down. So now they exist, and you can come back to them at a later date. Or you may come up with another idea in 2 years' time about another story, and it may just well be that the ideas that you've written down today may well chime or connect in some way with your idea that you have in 2 years' time. This is why I always say write your ideas down and build a library of your ideas, and you can always go back to them. So for part 7 of your activity, if you can try to kind of write one sentence or a line or a few words on how the story would end for your character. So let me just pick out some more examples. Let's have a look. So this is from, oh wow, let's have a look. This is from Al Yona. Thank you, Al. A dairy farmer called Mr. Moo, who lives on Mars, in 2075 has his cow stolen by Professor Milk. Mr. Moo goes to Saturn to rescue his cow. One of Professor Milk's henchmen captures him and puts him in prison on Neptune. Mrs. Moo rescues Moo. Mrs. Moo was on holiday on Neptune. Mr. and Mrs. Moo go back to Saturn and defeat Professor Milk to get back Mr. Moo's cow. It turns out Mr. Moo's cow is special and they can produce liquid gold instead of milk. Brilliant. Love it. Now, Al, depending on, what you like, what types of books you want to write or read, you could replace, the immediate thought is that it's because it's got Mr. Moo, Mr. and Mrs. Moo, and it seems quite for a young audience, which it could be. That could be a great adventure story for younger children, or a great picture book, for example. But you could replace Mr. Moo and Professor Milk with, a bit more of a mature, older character or theme. but the general concept there, that you've got this introduction, and then you've got the incident, then you've got the action and the adventure, you've got the setback, the salvage, the ending, the twist, where the cow can produce liquid gold. It's brilliant, fantastic. So excellent. So let me just read out one more. Let's have a look. It's good to pick out the full ones that where you've put them all in one comment, because it's so much easier to read. So let me right, Joe. I read out Joe's first part a little while ago, but now I want to read the second part, but I can't find the first part. So sorry, Joe, but it sounds great. So let me just read out the second part that you've got. Snowy and Iceberg, the penguins, find new determination and realise they enjoy living in the wild. They find old nets that they catch fish with and discover that you can eat some berries. They find a new sense of freedom and joy in living like this. So I really like that, because you get this sense of friendship between Snowy and Iceberg. They've discovered this new way of living, so that the characters are developing new ways of this new sense of freedom. This is great, and you can do this at home. You can play this as an activity with your brother, sister, parents, friends. You know, just say, right, challenge me now. I'm going to come up with an idea for a character, where they live, when they exist, then something happens to them. And just, this is how we generate ideas and get our brains active and energized and kind of clicking into gear. So, thank you very much. I'm going to call it a day there. Next week, I'll leave some time for questions. And thank you so much for tuning in again. Really enjoyed that. And let's talk next week about the adversity story as well. Brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care, stay safe, and hopefully see you next week for the next workshop, which is about voice. So the different styles of writing that we can use. So thank you very much, everybody. Take care, stay safe.